I wanted to touch on this. I have a little bit in previous videos, and that's fear. Fear is something that eats at you, and it's something you have to face or not. If you don't face it, then you have dire consequences in yourself, and if your society won't face it, the entire history of the planet shows where that creates huge problems. But a couple of quotes, and it's worry and fear. The most deplorable waste of energy in human life is caused by the fatal habit of anticipating evil, of fearing what the future has in store for us. The fear habit shortens life, for it impairs all the psychological processes we've been impaired. We've been taught to fear, and that works for people in control, people in power. If they can keep you afraid of the other, afraid of a disease, for instance, afraid of anything. That it's what movies make huge amounts of money. Horror films, getting at the little dark places in our brain, and people will go really almost insane sometimes. Many years ago, I had a young man just out of high school who worked for us he was a runner, and he had been to see, this is how long ago it was, the original movie, The Exorcist. Scared him to death. He was like 19 years old, and he actually ended up having to go see a doctor and a priest to help him with how that affected him. But being afraid is not uncommon. It's a natural kind of something within us to teach us to be ready, to teach us that something is out there. But if you run from it, and sometimes to fall back, regroup, they call it a retreat, you have to do that in order to take a better look. So in that particular instance, you may have failed or whatever, but then you come back and you learn from your mistakes. Being constantly afraid is a killer. Recently, let's see, there were three things that I saw or read about in the news. One was two women walked into an elevator, I don't know where, and there was a man inside. He was a black man. And they were masked, and he was not. And they got very aggressive. I mean, super aggressive. And the man had it on with his phone on camera, and they were doing the same thing. But they were chanting Black Lives Matter and literally assaulting this man because he didn't have his mask on, because they were afraid. Then there was a man who from Canada, a journalist. And I understand, I've not been there, but I understand Canada is in a severe form of lockdown over all of this. And this guy and his wife had to get away. So they went to Florida, which is not. And that was one of the reasons they went. And the whole time the guy was in Florida, he was lamenting, upset that they weren't doing what Canada was doing, which is he left Canada to get away from that. But he was afraid, and he was horrified that the people in Florida weren't upset. As far as they were concerned, he could have the mask, and they couldn't. They didn't care. Then the funniest one of all is there was some kind of a demonstration over the weekend in Washington, D.C., and this woman jumped out of her SUV, pitching a temper tantrum. She was literally jumping up and down, screaming at them about not doing the math and invading her territory. I mean, it's sad and hilarious at the same time. But this is where fear leads you. I mean, and I had written in another post on a Facebook page about my grandfather, who was born in the 19th century and was in World War I. Grew up. His father left when he was quite young, and he and his brother and mother worked their farm in a rural area of the South. And tough guy. He was a very tough man. So was his brother. And I never met her. His mother. She died before I was born. But he was in World War I on the front lines, and he was in artillery, and was isolated at one point. But anyway, when he came back to the States after the war, the Spanish flu was running rampant, and I understand. I could be corrected, but I understand that something like 20 million people died with that flu virus at that time. And when I was a young boy, 14 or 15 years old, he counseled me about not being afraid. He said, of course, inside you're going to have fear, but living in fear is no way to live. You have to get up every day and you have to go do what you need to do. And you can't get in a fetal position and think it's all going to go away. And I thought about that recently. I reread something I read, I think, many, many years ago. I think it was a requirement. It was, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it, Anabasis, which is the story of Xenophon, who was a professional Greek soldier, mercenary, and scholar, and a friend of Socrates. And during the Persian Empire, after the emperor had died, there were two brothers, Artaxerxes and Cyrus the younger. And Artaxerxes became the emperor. And Cyrus the younger was allowed to live by his older brother, and he was governor over the greater part of what is now Turkey in the empire, but he wanted to be the emperor. So he began recruiting soldiers, and he recruited 10,000 Greek mercenaries, the hoplites, who were fantastic soldiers. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I have a tendency to digress, but they ended up in a battle, and Cyrus the younger was killed in the battle, and the Greeks had held their own. So for 2 or 3 days, Artaxerxes was in kind of a face-off, and he didn't really want to go into that meat grinder, and he tried to get them to surrender and this, and they were 1,000 miles from their home, and they were near Babylon, and they wouldn't give in, they wouldn't surrender their weapons, and so eventually they began marching home. But instead of going directly west, they went north toward the Black Sea, where there were some Greek colonies. So anyway, the whole story, and the whole reason I'm telling you this, is there's 10,000 men surrounded on all sides. And yes, they fight, but warriors fear too. And it's a wonderful story. If you ever get the chance to read it, and I'm surprised they've never made a movie over this. But it's a fantastic story of everything is against you, and they just keep going. And finally, they reach the Black Sea, and the end of the story is they're chanting, and I don't know the Greek words, but it's the sea, and they're there. And from there's more to the story, and they eventually end up home, and Xenophon has other writings and so forth, but this is the one he's most well known for. Right now, there's a TV show, and I've seen one episode of it because you have to pay to see the others. It's called 1883, and it's very popular, and it shows more realistically than we've seen before what people had to go through. And this is what I want to get back to. Right now in this country and in Western civilization, people are living in fear over this disease, and it's being used to control us. Yes, you have to do what you can to fight the disease, but several doctors I have read who I understand are quite knowledgeable about this sort of thing, have said viruses are going to virus. And I've talked once before in 1968 when I was young. We had, I think it was called the Hong Kong flu, and it killed, I think it was 100 and some odd thousand people, and the population was under 200 million then. I think it was 180, 190 million. And a million some odd people were infected. But we didn't do what we're doing now in that we quarantine people my age range because we were the most vulnerable. Younger people were not, and kids were not, just like now. And they're trying to isolate children, and it's doing a lot of damage. But anyway, back to the 1883. I do digress. It shows what people went through, and to settle this country required a huge amount of confidence and the ability to wake up in the morning and know that you might not make it to the end of the day. And even then, you might not wake up the next day because something could happen during the night. But you had, disease killed people, Native Americans, Americans. What you had to go through to get to where you were going and to build your home and to start a settlement was just huge, huge. One time, and I've said this in another posting, I was near Wichita Falls, Texas in the late fall. And I'm standing, it's the plains, but it's not flat plains, it's rolling plains. But you can see for miles and miles and miles. And the weather does change dramatically. It can go from being 90 degrees to 20 below in a heartbeat, And the weather kills people there. And this was the heart of what they call Comancheria, which was the heart of the Comanche land. And the Comanches were fierce warriors. And they and Texans fought for 40 years. Think about that. 40 years of constant, never-ending warfare. And again, it's not touched on that much when they say Afghanistan was their longest war. No, it was the war with the Comanches and to a certain extent the Kiowas. The Comanches were so bad, they drove the Apaches out of Texas, and they controlled every other tribe in the Texas area. But anyway, what people had to go through was amazingly tough, and they faced it and they went on. They would laugh at us today. We cower over not getting the right kind of coffee, for crying out loud. And fear is terrible. Fear will eat at you. Fear is used. And right now, we glorify fear. Yes, war is bad. I understand that. But at the same time, the human male in particular is built for warfare. If you look at our our structure, we're built to run, to hit, to throw, and that's to hunt, and then to fight. And when you're in that mode, and I've boxed and I've played football and I've been in the military, I was never in combat. But you do have adrenaline, an adrenaline rush that is nothing else comes. When you're in the zone in a football game, I can't tell you what it feels like. And when you're in that rush with the other guys in that game, you come together like you've and never come together before. And having gone through basic and AIT and war games and stuff like that, it's kind of the same thing. I have no idea what it's like in real life. Like I said, I've never done that. But this constant glorification of being afraid is not good for us. Yes, you're going to be afraid, but you face it, you swallow it, and you move forward. And right now, our leaders, what we call our leaders, are encouraging us to be afraid and to do what they tell us to do. And most of them, what they want to tell us to do is to live in fear and obey them at all cost. Y'all have a good day.